Hey, welcome to the Road and Morale podcast. So do you ever feel like screaming out in the office, on Zoom or outside the school gates? For the love of God, come on, really? Then if this is you and you're looking for an honest, fun and frank podcast on life and business, then sit back and listen to me, Rona Morale. I'll be bringing great people on the show to talk, share and debate their life experiences and business challenges, keeping the show unpolished, but in a fun and unique British style, with sarcasm, tenacity, or maybe a few swear words or tears. This podcast keeps it real, honest, raw, and removes the bullshit in the only way I know how, through authenticity and getting shit done. Think of it less like the Housewives of New York or Towie with the lipo and drama, and more like the house lives of the real world. I hope you'll take something away to be better informed, laugh, smile, or maybe even finally getting the confidence to shout, come on really. So enjoy. Hey Nicky, welcome to the Road and Morale podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Just getting ready for
Good.
Christmas, although you already are ahead of me with the decorations up.
Thankfully up.
Good old Christmas spirit. So listen, for everybody out there listening to this podcast, this is really an emotive podcast for me and my guest. Nicky and I have known each other for about 25 years now, so
It makes me feel old.
showing our age. And Nicky and I first met when we started university in Birmingham all those long years ago, and we've always stayed very close friends, and as a group I guess we've always had ups and downs and stories. However, Nicky and Vic, your husband and your daughter Ruby, went through a journey that most people will never have to go through, and I hope never do have to go through, and that was the loss of your son Jack on February the 18th 2011. And this wasn't just an ordinary story. This was a story that we'll touch on about sepsis and the awareness of sepsis, but also the absolute fight that you had on your hands after Jack passed with the NHS and the huge national institution that it is. Now, this podcast isn't here to slag off the NHS and all the amazing work that we know millions, 1.4 million people work in the NHS. It's not about that. This is about your story, your experience, and your fight. So, Nicky, if you wouldn't mind, as difficult as it is, going back to the awareness of sepsis and the day that Jack died, and help us understand what happened on that day, and then we'll move forward into then the decade of fighting that you've had since.
Okay, so basically, Jack had, I'll obviously try and cover it in a nutshell because there's so much information to go through. Night before I took Jack into hospital, he ended up having sickness and diarrhea. Obviously, my husband slept downstairs with him, and so that we could try and get some sleep between us. Got up in the morning, very lethargic, phoned the doctors, got him in just to get him checked. I thought they're going to turn around and tell me he's got a chest infection as normal. Here's some antibiotics, off you go. Anyway, doctor examined him, said, think I need to get a second, I need you to take him to the hospital. We need to get a second opinion. Took him to the hospital. Me being a parent, like all of us as parents are, I'm not medically trained. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I put my trust that day in the NHS, and you know, I thought my son was in the best place to be looked after, to get better. So we took him in with sickness and diarrhea. We didn't really know anything else. Nothing was ever mentioned to us when he went in about sepsis, when he went in about having pneumonia, nothing. There was no kind of urgency. Obviously, there was lots of neglect and lots of errors that happened that day, things that were missed, important signs of bloods that were taken, that were sort of looked at and ignored. And then later on, the systems went down, so bloods were taken again, and they didn't come back until sort of 3 hours later. A chest X-ray was done at 12, didn't come back till 3. So that day, there was actually 21 errors made by one doctor. In the end, we didn't know anything about sepsis. We didn't know that's what he had. They turned the SATS machine off. They didn't obviously report his blood correctly. They didn't. They turned the SATS machine off. They didn't get his chest X-ray back in time. He wasn't monitored as accurately as he should be. Obviously, he was still losing out of the other end, so he'd still got quite a lot of diarrhea that day.
Yeah.
We were getting through sort of 8 nappies every hour. We were never told, put them in this place, we will weigh them for you.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. So we were kind of there and just going with it, really.
And just for the listeners, what time of the day did you go into hospital?
So we went into hospital. I got to the hospital about 10 o'clock.
Yeah, in the morning.
Yeah, in the morning. So the doctor that actually saw him, Dr. Adisa Bauer-Garba, she started her shift at 8:30 that day. So she'd only actually been on that shift an hour and a half when she actually started to look after my son. Basically, I handed the envelope that the doctor had given me. She looked at it. I told her all Jack's history, about his stomach and bowel operation, about his open heart surgery, everything, as I do. And she looked after him, or supposedly didn't look after him all day. And, lots of things were left. It's just one of those. For me to go into too much detail, I'd be here all day. But basically, he was neglected. There was lots of errors made. Yeah. And in a nutshell, basically, he got moved to a different ward at 5:30 that evening, because then they told us what had happened was he had a chest X-ray done at 12. It came back at he had a chest X-ray at 11:15. It was back at 12:05. She didn't look at it till gone 3 o'clock. Right. We were then told he'd got pneumonia, but we're not sure whether it's viral or bacterial. We need to wait for bloods to come back to check. It came back bacterial. Right. She then left him. So in total, she left him for 6 hours with no antibiotics. The toxic blood test that she did first thing in the morning, she completely chose to ignore. His chest X-ray didn't come back. We wasn't told about the nappy, and his SATS machine was switched off. I can go on and on. I know. Anyway, he went on this ward, and as I thought, he was sort of, as I call it, jumping around the bed. To me, at that time, I didn't know he was agitated. I didn't know he was anxious. All he wanted to do was get this oxygen mask off, which he shouldn't have even had on. He should have had CPAP. He should have been in intensive care. Should have called a consultant. None of that happened. At the end of the night, when Jack really needed help, when he crashed, that same doctor, Adisa Bauer-Garba, who had seen him at 10 o'clock that morning, who had only actually been on shift an hour and a half at the start of the day. I have to say this because it really bugs me when people are saying she did a 13-hour shift, she didn't have a break, she didn't do this, she didn't do that. She was working 1.5 hours when she saw my son at 10 o'clock that morning. Yeah. Later on that day, she was obviously the emergency doctor on call that day. And when the crash team came, there was an error with that as well. The wrong crash team came, then they went off, then they came back. The whole thing was just a complete farce. And
she actually ordered a DNR, which is a do not resuscitate on
basically Jack. So what had happened was, in the end, when the resus team came up and it was a proper team that needed to do what they needed to do, I obviously got shoved out of the room. And I didn't know what was going on. I was frantic. I was, oh my God, what's happening? Please look after my son, please save him, what's going on? Next minute, it was really, I can see it as clear as day. I can see it like yesterday. And a nurse came up to me and she said, Jack needs his mummy. So I remember walking into the room. Yeah. He was propped up, laid on his bed with his cushions up, and he just looked fast asleep. And I didn't know at that point he'd gone. And a nurse said to me, Jack needs his mummy. And I went, please don't tell me, please don't tell me. Next minute, a doctor, now know that was Adisa Bauer-Garba, come running in the room and said, no, he can have everything. And what she did was got Jack mixed up with another child. Yeah. I must stress, the child she got Jack mixed up with had been discharged at 3 o'clock from the Leicester Royal Infirmary. Right. That afternoon, she went to Jack at 8:15 in the evening. My question in court was, how do you get a Down syndrome little boy with an oxygen mask mixed up with a child that's on an end of life plan that was really, really poorly and known to the hospital? Her response was, I didn't get the children mixed up. I got the mums mixed up. I mean, I'm sorry, but how can you get the mums mixed up? Where's the medical records? Where's the child? She should have looked at Jack. She should have said to me, is this Jack Adcock? Is this, how can you get, the whole the whole thing of it is just shocking.
Well,
shocking.
No, and for those people who don't know this story, the Jack Adcock case was featured heavily in front news, on ITV, all the main television programmes. Good Morning Britain, I know that you were on. And so for those that don't know, after that evening, I mean, you've kind of touched on some of the things that happened throughout that day. After that, the following morning and the subsequent weeks after that, a lot of things started to come out that obviously you didn't know had happened at the time, because you are fretful, your child's ill, you're trusting the doctors. But take me through those weeks that after Jack had died, and you started to hear the stories and the fact that reports and logs weren't done properly, things were done, etc. And you started to move towards this, hold on a minute, something fundamentally went wrong here. We need to do something.
Yeah, so basically we had a phone call from the hospital the following morning at 8 o'clock to say, can we come in and discuss what happened? So we went in, and thankfully one of our friends came with me and took minutes of the meeting, which was the best thing I could have ever done, or she could have done. And anyway, we were there hours. We were with top people at the NHS, and I remember everything, and I ask a lot of questions. And thank God is all I can say. And I remember someone coming in and saying, no, he can have everything. What happened? And this is when the can of worms started opening, really. So I was told for a split second, maximum 2 minutes, that this doctor, Adiza Bawagaba, had got my son mixed up with another child who was on a do not resuscitate, who was on a DNR.
But had been discharged early that day.
Can I just say, Jack was never on a DNR. Never, ever did I agree to it, and never was he on one. But she got him mixed up with another child that was discharged 3 o'clock following day. When, things started opening, we were there a few hours. The police came. Obviously, the police turned up. I was petrified. I was like, I haven't done anything. Because it's a sudden death, they need to investigate. And the only thing I can say is, thank God they did, because the police were absolutely amazing. We could not have done this without the police. They were amazing. So we gave a statement and everything else. So my friend that I took all the minutes from the meeting had emailed all of the conversation to the police, and also to Dr. Duffy, who was a top paediatrician. He was in charge, I believe, at the time. And anyway, we were sort of going through everything, and that was it. And then I had a conversation with the coroner, or the coroner's office, on the Monday, Tuesday. They told me that they'd had Jack's postmortem back, and his diagnosis of death was streptococcal septicemia secondary to pneumonia. We were told to go ahead, plan the funeral. We did. So we did this on the Thursday. It was all going. So this was on the actual Thursday. So this was, Jack had passed away on the Friday, the 18th of Feb. This was on the following Thursday. And it was going in the papers, it was going everywhere, to tell all my friends, to tell everybody. On the Friday, we had a phone call from the coroner's office. I was mortified, to basically say, we need to see you at 12 o'clock. We were like, okay. Obviously, I told them things were happening, and we got called to the coroner's office. We were in there a while. The police came, and we were just basically told, I'm really sorry, we can't release your son. And we were like, what do you mean? We need to investigate further, and if there is any criminal charges to be brought, then that person is entitled to a second post-mortem. And it took 3 months to get my son back and laid to rest.
And at that point, did you realise then that actually, because the police were there and that they weren't releasing your son, that something really seriously had gone wrong?
On that day, me and Vic felt physically, we'd felt sick, obviously, anyway. You can't wish anything. You wouldn't wish on your worst enemy to lose a child, and you don't expect to bury your children, before you sort of think. But in the circumstances, he should still be here, and that's the most difficult thing. And I think when they said that, we literally sort of both keeled over, and we were like, oh my God, what do you mean? And we just went crazy. And Obviously they couldn't comment, they couldn't say too much. And then obviously, you know, in the end, to get our son back, Jack had a second post-mortem, which nobody knew anything about. The coroner kept all the results herself in case it ever got caught to brought to a criminal court, so that the person who was being charged basically had their second post-mortem to hand, and nobody else ever seen it. So, you know, this was kept in strict confidence. The coroner had it, no one else saw it.
So you knew it was happening, but you didn't know the results or the outputs of that?
Didn't know anything.
No.
Didn't know anything. No.
And so obviously, you know, for me doing this, it's difficult as well, because, you know, being there with you throughout that whole journey. And I think I don't want to sit here and be biased against the story. But what I do know is that, having seen you in that journey and having sat in that court for 4 weeks, because fast forward now, we know that there's a problem, there's a systematic failure somewhere, and you as a family decided that you could let this rest. And as you've just said, Jack should still be here.
He should. He's 16 now.
Yeah, he would have had his 16th birthday this year. But you knew at the time that taking on an institution as big as the NHS was going to be huge. You would be exposing yourself to the world. But you fundamentally believed that the fight had to continue. And so what did you do next then with the police and the CPS? And how did it end up getting to the point being a court case? Because I know we had moments where it was and then it wasn't, and that went on for years. But can you summarise that?
It eventually took 4 years to get her and the other 2 nurses, because I think people forget, people just assume, and, you know, have this, it's the doctor, you know, mistakes happen, this, that, and the other. No, it isn't that. There wasn't just her, there was a doctor and there was 2 nurses. People seem to forget about the nurse that was involved as well. And what really grates me, which, you know, I'll go on in a bit, is the fact that people don't know the true facts. Like you've just said, you sat in court with me, you heard it. People that haven't sat in court and haven't listened to it and don't know the story are defending this doctor like it's a normal day-to-day thing. Things happen, accidents happen, we make mistakes. I know we make mistakes, I make mistakes. We're not 21, and definitely not the neglect he had.
I know one of the things that always surprised me was when they crowdfunded, this is obviously later on down, but they crowdfunded for the doctor.
Yeah,
I know it was over £350,000.
Yeah,
but no one at any point ever did the same for the nurse. No. So it felt like a seniority kind of play.
It's wrong. It's just wrong. But sorry, going back. So basically, we had so after. I'm trying to think, it's just all, so I'm trying to do it in timeline. So basically, so we were told that we couldn't release Jack, and we went 3 months till we actually got Jack back and laid him to rest. In that time, obviously, police came from the homicide team, because obviously it was classed, it was the homicide that was dealing with it, because it was, you know, it was a case of manslaughter, murder, that sort of thing.
Even you just saying that, I mean, as with your child, that there's a homicide team at your house.
The whole, and people say things, it gets easier. I can honestly tell you, hand on heart, it does not get easier. And these police came to my door, you know, they were, I mean, we couldn't have done it without them. They were brilliant. Turned up at my door, asked me questions, you know, as if, and I asked a question, and I'll never forget this. I asked a question and I said, I wish I'd never took my son to hospital that day. If I hadn't have took my son to hospital that day, he would have been better looked after at home. And I was told, if I hadn't have took my son to hospital that day, I would have been in trouble because I had not passed on my duty of care. So I put my son in the hospital, which I thought at that time was the best place, and they neglected him more than anything. I would have cared for him better at home, not having the experience they had. So it kind of went from there, and then we went to see solicitors. Obviously, we wanted to know where we were that way, so we did a civil. We were speaking to the police. So, and obviously it takes a long time to build up all this evidence. You need professionals, you need someone that's a third party, you need to, go around the country and get the best professionals that can give you the evidence and the advice on this sort of thing.
And I hope you don't mind me saying, and obviously none of this comes cheap.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, how were you in a position where you got financial support, or were you having to fund this yourself?
So basically, with our civil case, I managed, because we had buildings and contents insurance cover, we had legal cover with it, that covered us for medical negligence. So that helped us with a civil case against the hospital. The only thing I will say, and I want people to know this because it's absolutely disgusting, is the fact that when we actually got to, I'm going forward again, I'm sorry, but when we actually got to the inquest stage, so literally what had happened was, police had got it to the CPS. CPS had got the evidence. They had to get a professional at the time to look at all the evidence and put it into a report.
Yeah.
The way the doctor wrote it in the report wasn't the way he meant it on the stand, quite clearly. So the report came back and it said basically that there was a 90% chance Jack would have survived, which is very, very high. I mean, that's,
I'd take those odds.
90% chance of survival, but 10% chance he may not. So you've got the unreasonable doubt there.
Right.
So because of that, CPS threw it out.
Okay.
So we then ended up 2.5 years later going to an inquest.
Yeah.
So with the civil against the hospital, basically the legal cover that we had through the buildings and contents insurance covered that.
Right.
When we got to inquest, because it isn't a court, and obviously it can't be covered on your insurance because it isn't a court and they won't cover you, we had to pay for the inquest ourselves. And you're talking thousands and thousands and thousands.
Now, for most people, let's just point this out at this stage, that would be enough for people to not take the fight on, because
Absolutely.
how can you, most people can't afford that.
We remortgaged. And the hospital, the cheek of the hospital, they basically, because obviously we were going to inquest, and so we remortgaged. We had to remortgage our house because there's no way in a million years I'd have lived in a caravan. At the end of the day, I then knew something wasn't right regarding my son's death. He was neglected. There was that many mistakes made, and I needed to get some sort of justice for my son. I mean, thank God for my daughter, because if I hadn't have got my daughter, I wouldn't be here either. And I needed that. So we remortgaged to go to inquest. And so obviously we remortgaged to do that. We went to inquest on the which you also came to, Rona, on the final day of the inquest, which was the Friday. This professor that had wrote the report stood up in court, and the coroner asked the question, if Jack had have received antibiotics, intensive care, reeled off all these things, would he still be here today? That doctor, high up, turned around and said, yes. She asked him in 4 different ways the same question, and it was the same. I about collapsed. The inquest adjourned.
Right.
And with that evidence, we then had to get another professional, which the police did, to basically more or less say the same, but not be biased. He did, and that's how we got it to court.
And actually, what's worth pointing out here is that the way that, and anyone who may watch, crime programs or, have kind of a view on it, but the way the original guy had answered the questions was he can only answer what he's asked. So hence why the lady asked him in 4 different ways to make sure that there was no reasonable doubt, this 10%, which, let's be honest, if you're fighting for your child's life, every fucking one would take 90%. I mean, there's no question of that. Of course
you would. If someone says to me, it's £1 million, go and stand in front of an HGV lorry, there's a 90% chance of survival. It's a no-brainer. You know what I mean? It's 90%.
No, I know, exactly.
I'll
so
take that.
Obviously now at this point, the removal of that benefit of doubt or the legal term has now gone. So at that point, she adjourns the whole thing. And she tells the NHS, doesn't she, to go away and get professional help at this point.
Basically, yeah. So it was adjourned, and then it was a case of, you know, this needs to. So she made a report. She put lots and lots of things forward. I mean, the coroner was amazing as well. You know, she was brilliant. She left no stone unturned. But then nor did the police. The police that we had were amazing, and I can never ever thank them enough for that. I owe them my life for it. They were amazing, and I can't thank them enough. But yeah, so basically it was then adjourned. So we were like, whoa, this was 2.5 years after Jack had passed away. So then the police went off, and it took them months and months and months to get another professional in that field. And we had Dr. Nielsen, and wow, amazing man. And he gave evidence in court, and with his report that he wrote, we also had Susan Chapman, that she did the one for the nurse as well, because obviously they needed professionals from both sides, the doctor and the nurse. And 4 years it took, and then the doctor was arrested, the 2 nurses were arrested, and then I believe the doctor had to go on administrative duties. We then got it to court.
And can I just interject at this point? The individuals involved at this time were still able to work, have children, travel.
Yep. So the doctor, if I can just add, this is another thing that annoys me when people say trainee. So this doctor wasn't a trainee just come from university. This doctor was when she treated Jack, or didn't treat Jack, when she, the day of the 18th of February, she was an ST6. So that means she's gone to university, she's qualified, she's had 6 years experience, and she was actually a registrar in paediatrics. So she was a specialist registrar. So she wasn't a trainee from university, which I think people are getting mixed up by the term trainee.
Well, you would to most people.
She was actually able to work for another 4 years after my son's death that she contributed to, get herself to an ST8, which is consultant level.
Right.
She then went on to have more children, you know, which at the end of the day we're all entitled to. But never, ever, 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 ever until 7.5 years later, outside the appeal court, she was the first time she ever apologised, and the only reason she apologised was because there was loads of cameras outside. Not once did she apologise to me, and I have to say this in the nurse's defence. Obviously, going forward, obviously one of the nurses obviously wasn't charged. The nurse, Dr. Isabel Garber was charged, and Nurse Amara was charged with gross negligence manslaughter, both 2-year suspended sentence. And I have to say that nurse came up to me in court several times. I mean, she had the ball to come up to me, and you know, I was just, and people stepped in front, and
I think I was at one point.
Yeah, she was so remorseful. She was so apologetic, and I can never take that away from her. I would never ever forgive them for what they've done. But I think my hatred and my anger more at the doctor is because she's never shown an ounce of remorse. Never said sorry. She's fought us every single way. She's not cared. All she's worried about is herself, not what it's done to us as a family. She's now been given a second chance. It's 10 years in February since I lost my son. This is something we have to live with day in, day out. And that nurse was so remorseful. And
she lost her job instantly, didn't she? She was...
Yeah, oh God, yeah, she wasn't given it because she was bank staff and not employed by the Leicester Royal Infirmary. Apparently she was kicked out of her flat, more or less straight away. She had no support, nothing. And she was struck off as well. Well, where was her support when the doctor then won,
350 grand crowdfunding?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so it took 5 years to get to court after a 5.5 week trial. So
now, just in terms of obviously getting to the trial, there's one thing that will always stand out for me before the trial started was a very senior person within the NHS approaching us in the court and saying, this is ridiculous. No jury in the land will ever find a doctor or nurse guilty. And she was so smug, even it took all my might not to throat punch her. But obviously, not my fight, not the right place.
I'm actually going to name that person. I'm actually going to name that person because she should have been ashamed of herself. Her name is Hilary Killer. Right. And I'll never forget, during inquest, She'd come up to me a couple of times, and I'll never forget, outside, and I actually saw her, in fact, at another inquest regarding another little Down syndrome boy, regarding the Leicester Royal Infirmary. And it was, that was probably about, what we are now, 2020. I reckon that was about 3 years ago. Exactly the same. So very, very similar. Not as much neglect, but even so, they still contributed towards his death. And I'll never forget her coming up to me outside Nottingham Crown Court on the steps and saying to me, and her words exact were, because how I didn't launch her down the steps, I couldn't tell you, but I didn't. I was very professional. Her words to me were, "Don't be disappointed if you don't get the result that you want." And I turned around and said, well, let's just hope that this jury see it for the truth and see it for what it is. And I hope they both get charged with all of them get charged with gross negligence manslaughter. She should be appalled at what she said to me that day.
She didn't have a right to discuss or talk to you about it in that way. And just to remind people, this is the reason why something gets to court isn't because someone was tired and made a mistake. Anyone who knows the criminal justice system, the CPS do not allow charges to go forward on such a serious case where you've got gross negligence manslaughter, the homicide team. It was clear that these 21 systemic failures were how this case got to court. So I just wanted to kind of remind people.
I just need to say as well, Rona, just before you move forward, is, people keep saying this about, it was a system failure, it was this, it was that, it was the other. There was one system failure that day that contributed towards Jack's death. And and you know what, that could have been avoided, because first thing in the morning when that doctor, Adiza Bawagaba, took Jack's bloods, they actually came back really, really high, very high toxic. Yeah. And she thought, and she admitted this, and she said this in court, she thought that there was something wrong with the system. So she didn't log them. She completely ignored them and did them again. So had she have not ignored them, and had she have contacted ICT, intensive care, or got a consultant to look at them there and then, we wouldn't have been in this situation.
Or at least just flush the antibiotics through, because that wouldn't have made him worse.
Yeah, they would have literally got him in intensive care, put him on antibiotics straight away. We wouldn't have gone through the whole of the rest of the rigmarole. We wouldn't have. And you know what? If that had happened, and they would have tried, I could have turned around and said, "Thank you so much," and we wouldn't have the fight. We wouldn't have, God forbid, I'd have been distraught and devastated, of course, and I would still live with it to the day I do. The fact that I've had to fight for this to try and get justice for my son, and the fact that my son should have never died on the 18th of February, is what absolutely kills me, and where I struggle, because, it's the error she made that day. The only one system error that there was that day was when the system she did the other blood test, the system went down and it didn't flash up. That's the only error that day. Every other error she made that day was a human error. And with the nurse, all of them were human errors. They were not, they were not computerized. They were not, they were human errors, except that one when the system went down. Yeah. And another thing that annoys me is the fact that, after this 5 years of getting to court, and they both got charged, then they had to go through the General Medical Council and the Nursing Midwifery Council. Yeah. Well, the nurse was struck off straight away at the Nursing Midwifery Council. Obviously, the other nurse got away with it for obvious reasons. Yeah. And the doctor obviously went through the GMC. Well, you've got something called the MPTS, which is I guess it's like a board within the GMC that make the decisions, whether to suspend someone, whether to take them off, whether to, scrap their registration, whatever it might be. So the MPTS, when this went, obviously she's got, gross negligence manslaughter charge. The MPTS decided that they were going to suspend her for 12 months because of the neglect and because of all of the errors she did. Now, even the judge turned around and said, it wasn't an error. This was truly exceptionally bad. It wasn't.
Barn door, wasn't it? I think one of them referred to it as barn door.
Truly exceptionally bad. So it was really bad. So obviously the GMC didn't agree. So the GMC appealed against the MPTS. Yeah. So we went to court. And basically she then got struck off. Now, this is what riles me, is the fact that all these doctors jumped on the bandwagon when she was struck off, which was 6 years after Jack had passed away. Where were they when she got arrested? Where were they during the court case, listening to all the evidence. Where were they when she got charged with gross negligence manslaughter? Nowhere to be seen. But as soon as she gets struck off, they all panic, they all jump on the bandwagon and think this could be me. Well, if a doctor could make that many mistakes on one child, well, in fact two, because she got it mixed up with another child, then they shouldn't be in that profession in the first place. And what annoys me more than anything is the fact they all clubbed together and raised £350,000 for her to get a new legal team so she could appeal, which she won the right to work again.
Yeah.
But not one of them, not one, read the court transcripts. And I tell you why. Chris Day, who set the funding page up, I paid out of my own pocket thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds, and some of my friends helped and contributed for me to buy the court transcripts. I bought them, and when I was having conversations with people on Twitter that were very, very quick to judge me and it was my fault and everything else.
And this is what happens when something gets national press.
Yeah. And basically it came to light that none of they were promised that if they contributed this money that they were then going to see these transcripts. Not one of them had read the court transcripts, so not one of them knew the truth. All they know is what her solicitors team and everyone else was choosing to tell them, which was not the truth. And I think the people that I have shared this with, because obviously if I could make it public I would, but I can't because there's personal information in there.
Of course.
The people I've chose to share this with cannot believe what they have read.
And I think from a human level, you know, and this is just me speaking for me, having sat through that court case with you, and you know me as a friend, I'm always someone who looks at the other side of the story and goes, well, hold on a minute, you know, she never deliberately went to work to kill a child. You and I both know that. Yeah, we know that.
Didn't get up that morning and say, you know, I'm going out today to. Of course you didn't. Of course.
But every single day I sat in that court, I tried to think about her point of view, and I tried to think about what was she thinking, what was she doing, like how's she going to respond to this. But I can honestly say that, well, frankly, I was useless. I just ended up bawling every day. But that
she
was
wasn't
because
remorseful in court. She had no remorse.
I think as a mother and as a female, watching somebody, whether she'd been trained or coached to remain emotionless, or it was her coping mechanism, I don't know. But I can't get my head around. Either I was in a state of anger or upset and I couldn't control my emotions. I don't know how I would have been stood in the docks. The only time I saw a remote amount of remorse was when the verdict came in and the head slightly dropped. And I guess in the back of my head when this whole journey started, Nicky, and I tried to detach myself from the fact that you are you and we are friends, what would it look like to the outside world? Or this is a young boy who's died. The family can't deal with it, so they're taking the NHS to court. And
that's exactly all I've had,
horrible
I've been called racist. I've been called, the abuse I've had is shocking. And to the point where, you know, I've even had, I had one doctor, actually, I went to the police about it, inboxing me, a retired doctor. Now, I'm not being awful, but these people are supposed to be very professional people. The way they have dealt with me, the way, not all of them, because some of them have been brilliant. And a lot of them, since reading the court transcripts, have completely changed.
Right.
But some of them have contacted me regardless. Even before we went into court that day, I had this guy contact me. I've had quite a few doctors contact me, actually, and say, I'm so sorry, I'm so ashamed that people that I work with are behaving and acting like this. But the people that were acting like this were calling me racist. I mean, I'm the least racist person in the whole wide world. I've got an auntie, an uncle, a granddad, mixed race, and I'm the least racist person in the whole world. I could have took the thing is, you went out that day to hurt my son because he had Down syndrome, because he had a disability. I wouldn't stoop myself so low. People were then even saying that I contributed towards my son's death because I gave him the enalapril. No, what was it? Someone put, the mother is to blame. She didn't even ask a doctor or a nurse if she could give him this medication. People haven't got a clue. People are jumping and having these opinions and don't know anything. And just to clarify, that night, He was due his Alapril at 7:15. And just to clarify, while I'm on this, because this was really gut-wrenching for me,
well, you're being accused of effectively killing your son.
Contributing of killing my son. So that night he was due his Alapril at 7:15. So I said to the nurse, who also took the stand and verified this was true, can I give my son my son needs his medication. He's on an Alapril, he has it 12 hours apart, he's due it at 7:15. Bear with me, I'll go and speak to the duty doctor. So she went off, she came back and said, we can't give it because we've not prescribed it. But yes, you can give it to him if that's what he normally has. Now, this was another error of Bauer Garber. She was saying he shouldn't have had it. Now, if he shouldn't have had it on that day, she should have quite definitely wrote in his notes, do not give an Alapril under any occasion. Not a word. So that was another error that she did. So anyway, it was given as an Alapril.
And reports were falsified, weren't they? They were filled in days and weeks after they should have been.
So basically, all of the figures so his stats machine was switched off at 1 o'clock. All the figures from then were until we got this other nurse were basically made up, didn't even make sense or anything. But going back to the Alapril, sorry, because this really, really grates me. And even the defence team that she had, just shocking. They just how they can do it to someone, try to blame me again in court and everything else. But
I remember.
To go back to the Alapril, so basically I asked the nurse, who asked the doctor said, yes, come back. Adiz Bauer Garber not once put anything in his notes, he should not have this because of X, Y, and Z. He had his Alapril. Then in court, they were trying to blame it on the Alapril, which is why he passed away. But can I just add, her defence team were trying to get, so it didn't go in court, they were trying to get the DNR when she got my son mixed up with another child taken out, so the jury didn't have to listen to that. So, but they were quite happy for the Alapril to stay when it wasn't my fault, sort of thing. They're so dirty. But anyway, so
it's ruthless.
In court, they had to get specialists that knew about an Alapril, that took the stand, that were cross-examined by my prosecution, that were cross-examined by the defence team. He was asked the question, did the Alapril that Jack was given that evening contribute or speed things up? His answer was, because of the way he was given it, which is diluted in water, it would take 4 hours to get into his liver, I think they said, to make it enalaprate for it to do anything. So it had no contribution whatsoever. But there are still people on Twitter, on websites that don't know anything that are accusing me of contributing to my son's death, and I didn't contact a doctor or a nurse. It's shocking. And I've had to put up with that.
And I think that's, it's probably a podcast for another time, but it's kind of this whole, we only see what we're told and we only get snippets of information. And I only feel like, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast with you. And as you know, I ummed and ahed about it because you're one of my best friends and I love you, but I didn't want to feel like I wanted to use your story for my gain. However, having sat through a court case and watching a defence team go hell for leather and your team really tease everything out where everything is exposed, and even then things are hidden, like you just said, things get hidden.
They try to hide it.
It feels like that any story that's put out there and put on the news needs that forensic analysis. And this brings me on, I'm conscious of time, but this brings me on to the Panorama show.
Don't even get me started on that show.
So we'll for anybody listening, Panorama spent a lot of time and had been
9 hours
sniffing around you guys for quite some time. Certainly when they knew the court case was happening, and then when we got the verdict and all of that. And that was a bittersweet moment as well, by the way, because we were both able to turn to that senior lady and go, in your face. But at that moment, they'd been kind of sniffing around. You'd agreed to do Panorama on the understanding that Panorama is a 50-50. It's both sides of the story.
Split.
Yeah, and I was like, this could be really good for you to help with the story. Now, the story airs, we watch it, then what?
Oh my God, I cannot believe what I watched. So we did 9 hours of filming. They used 10 minutes 10 minutes of me and my husband talking. The rest of the time was spent on the doctor. They'd already favoured the doctor. They didn't show hardly any of the errors. They covered her crowdfunding. They redo it because it's like a documentary, isn't it? So there was a patient and going up and stuff like that. They did not tell half of the story, let alone all of the story. They didn't use the true facts. They didn't use, they literally was on that doctor's side from day dot. I mean, they even went out and spoke to a crowdfunding person, the Chris Day that I spoke to you about earlier on, who hasn't seen the court transcripts. I just could not believe what I was watching. And for her to sit there and cry as well, for me, the way they portrayed the Panorama documentary was, please feel sorry for me. I'm a doctor. I've made an error and I'm really, really sorry. And that's not what happened.
Because it came across a little bit like she was a scapegoat, wasn't it? It was like, it's the big NHS, let's just blame her.
Yeah, they were trying to blame the NHS. They were trying to blame use her as a scapegoat. They were trying to go through all of these different things. And I just could not believe when I watched it. I just thought, and to be perfectly honest, the lady that did the presenting, I actually got in contact with her through Twitter, Deb Cohen, and I told her exactly what I thought, because the way they portrayed that was absolutely disgusting. And they made it look like we've lost our son. There was a common error. It's one of those things that happen. The doctor's really sorry. She's been given a second chance. And none of the nitty gritty, none of the true facts, none of the true errors were ever told.
Something like this does not get to court.
It was shocking, honestly. I was just when I watched it, I was mortified because I thought, she's breaking down in tears on TV. Wow. She can't even apologise to me. And it takes her 7.5 years to apologise, standing outside of court in front of a row of cameras. I mean, I'm not being awful. Her apology means nothing to me because it was too late. The nurse that came up to me in court and apologised to me several times, and mentally, I could see the damage it had done to her. And I'm very grateful she did that. I'll never forgive them, but I am so grateful she did that. Whereas this doctor, not an ounce of remorse, but to cry on TV. And it was almost like, oh, I feel sorry for this doctor. Oh, it's so sad. Oh, she's been scapegoated. She's a junior doctor. And I just cannot believe the way Panorama portrayed them. And I will never, ever, 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 ever. And I said to Deb Cohen, I said, I will never, ever trust you or anyone like you ever again.
And I think it's fair to say, I had a lot of choice words that evening, and a lot of friends who'd reached out to me on Facebook, people who weren't that close to the story could see that also. Now, of course, for anyone listening, it would be impossible for me to be unbiased in this conversation and interview. You are my friend, and I met Jack on day one when he was born. I've still got photos of him everywhere. He used to send them in the post. And look, I can't be unbiased in this story, and I know that, but I feel
the truth.
I know the truth, and that's the thing. I sat in that court every single day, seeing every piece of evidence and being able to translate it. In fact, the one thing that your prosecutor was really good at was just making it understandable.
English,
because I'm just a bit thick, but the sun's blinding me now. But yeah, I think that whole kind of it touched a nerve with me. And then therefore, when I watch Panorama, and I guess there's part of me that just goes, I wish everyone could have seen that 4 weeks. And then you have a right to an opinion. Then you absolutely have a right to an opinion.
Exactly. If you know the truth, and you've either sat in court or you've read the court transcripts and you know the whole truth, I'm happy for you to have an opinion, and everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But do not have an opinion on something that you know nothing about, that you are half the story on hearsay, and then accuse me of contributing towards killing my own son, or I'm racist, or I'm this, that, and the other. I mean, it's absolutely shocking.
Yeah,
some of the behaviour is just, it's disgusting.
I mean, the reality is, Nicky, at the end of the day, the moment you're out on front page newspapers, on national news, you are always going to get that. But you knew that, but you also decided you and Vic decided that that wasn't going to stop you. You weren't going to stop when you had to remortgage your house. You weren't going to stop when for a long time you didn't think you'd get any funding whatsoever. You and Vic as a family have received no, sorry, even Harley's annoyed at the whole situation. But you know, any financial money that you may have had through interviews has all gone towards Down syndrome and Wish for Kids.
Yeah,
you have not taken one penny
we've
from
literally,
anything.
When all the girls got together and did a crowdfund, not a crowdfund, all the girls got together and did a funding thing, and it got up to, I think we raised 9 grand. 4.5 went to the Downs group and Leicestershire Downs group, and 4.5 went to Wishes for Kids, and then they carried it on. You know, Jez and Shane's carried it on, and then every interview I've done, whether it be on Good Morning Britain, in a magazine, in a newspaper exclusive, all of the funding that we've ever received, I've contributed every penny to Wishes for Kids.
I know you have, and then that's what I wanted to just get out there as you know, as well. I'd love to know where that 350 grand went.
Exactly.
For the doctor. Now, listen, what I do really want to do, if that dog will shut up, is I really want to end this story. We know there's going to be more to come, and I don't doubt I'll probably do another session with you of what's happened since, and that's another whole hour we could have. But what I want to do is end on an amazing note, and we talk about Jack, because Jack was such a firebomb, Tasmanian devil. He was so bloody funny, and I just want you to have the last few words about Jack and the little boy that we all knew.
God, where do I start? I could talk to you for an hour about Jack. He was just amazing. He was just full of life. He loved dancing. He loved wiggling his bum. He loved his football. He loved books. He loved cheese and onion crisps. He used to have, I mean, the day before we lost him, Vic picked him up from school, and he had Vic chasing after him through the playground. He loved the wiggles. You know, there's nothing Jack didn't do. I mean, he was our, you know, oh my God, he was my world. Obviously I've got my daughter as well, and she's my world, but you know, he was my first, and you know, I would not, I mean, obviously when Jack was born, we didn't know he was Downs. But you know what, I wouldn't have swapped him for the world. He was absolutely amazing and gave us so much love, so much fun, so much pleasure. And I think that's what is so gut-wrenching, is the fact that, you know, he had the stomach and bowel up at night, 6 days old, and major open heart surgery at 4.5 months, and he got through that. And I know deep down, if he'd have been given a course of antibiotics like he should have been, he would still be here now. And you know what, now I'd probably have girls knocking on my door, because he loved the ladies. He loved the ladies, and he was just a little charmer. He'd walk in a room and he'd give you a smile, and he was like a magnet. Everybody adored him. He was amazing.
He was, and I think, you know, I personally just, you know, always admired the way you and Vic challenged him. You pushed him. You didn't put him into a box because he had Downs. You know, you treated him like you would any child, and that shone through in his character and his ability to shine. And I think that will always be a strong memory for me and his character. So Nicky, I just want to say a huge thank you for being so open and honest. And I know there's so much more we could talk about. And I know it's an emotive subject, but I, as the story still continues, because you're still fighting, and we can talk about that another time. I just wanted people to be reminded about Jack, what this story is about. Be aware of the signs of sepsis. And if you think something's not right in your heart of hearts,
question it.
Shout.
Get somebody else.
Question. Shout. Don't feel nervous.
Ask for a second opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, thank you again for sharing it with us all. And
you're more than welcome. Thank you for letting me talk about it, because you know, I want his memory alive. I want to, and if I can, by talking and you know, however many people see this, and if they can take something from this, then it's just to, if they're not sure, just to question it, or just to, I would hate, or if this can save one life by doing this chat, then I'll do it over and over and over and over and over again. You know, I would never ever want another family to go through what and you know, to go through what we are and have gone through and still going through.
I know, and thank you. You know, we really appreciate it, and I will see you very, very soon.
All right, take
So
care. Speak
thank
to
you
you later.
very much.
No
Bye.
problem. Bye.
Bye. So that's it. You've made it. The show's over. Thank you for being with us. I hope you've been able to take something away, maybe solve a problem, or just know you're not alone. Here's hoping it made you smile with a few laughs along the way. Please feel free to find me on all social media channels, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just search the Rona Morale podcast. Have an awesome day and see you next time.